a variety of different darts.
Oh, you found your scissors.
Yes, who found it? Somebody found it. Emily? Somebody found it for me. Emily or Evelyn, I think, gave it to me. Was it you?
Yeah.
Okay, it was Emily, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so the first one that you can try is the curved waist dart. This is basically what's going to be on our skirt pattern. Same thing, it's called a curved waist dart, but really it's just a waist dart. They kind of have these lines curving in on the pattern a little bit. We're just really doing a straight waist dart. So the way that you start your dart process is you're gonna fold that dart in half as best you can. So you're gonna match those little notches up, and that's going to help you to find where the one side of the dart actually, is going to be sewn. And you're going to put a pin through that line, sort of towards the top. And what you're going to do, you're going to check and make sure that that needle or pin or whatever goes through both lines. If it does, that means that when you put this down on the table and you sew, that your needle is actually going to go through both lines, and your goal is to hit both lines. Once you make sure it did go through, and if it doesn't, so if I had it folded wrong, you see how it missed it? Don't sew that. That means that your line is going to be way off and that the size of your dart is going to be off, okay? So make sure that it does actually go through both lines. And I like to do, for something this size, 2 to 3 darts. So I usually do one at the end where it's folded, and then sort of toward the tip. If you go too close to the tip, then it's too hard to really make it perfect. And then somewhere in between if you need to, if it's long. So again, the same thing. Once you put that pin through, make sure it goes through the line on the first side and also the line on the back side, okay? And if it doesn't, adjust it before you sew it, because otherwise you're going to have to take it out. All right? So the thing about some of these darts, most darts, if it's a dart like this, a waist dart and bodice darts, we're not going to backstitch. The only one we're going to backstitch is actually the fisheye dart, which I will demonstrate to you. But these, we start at the tip and we don't backstitch, because sometimes the backstitch can get a little messy, and we want the tip of that dart to be as smooth as possible. I did a couple of the darts on the back here. So what happens is this dart is basically getting tapered down to nothing, and if you don't start on the very edge where there's nothing, and if you backstitch, you can catch some of that fabric, and it can create a pucker right where you don't want a pucker, which is, you want this line, these darts, to pretty much be invisible. They're not decorative. You don't want to call any attention to those areas at all. So when you're going to start this, you're going to start at the very, very tip, and you're going to put your needle in right at the very edge of that fabric, so you just catch it. You're not going to backstitch, you're just going to start sewing and go straight to the end. Once you do get to the end, then you backstitch. Here, because we do want to make sure that it is solidified there. And the way that we make sure that those darts don't actually pull out is that we tie these two tails in a double knot. I know that seems kind of tedious, and it is a traditional dressmaking technique, but it is the best way to get a nice smooth dart. If you don't tie that, it will pull out and you'll see your stitches. So if you do tie it, you don't really see any stitches there. And what you're going to do is you're going to then take this over to the iron, and you're going to press that towards what the center front or center back would be. So in this case, it's the straight here. This would be the hip of the skirt, and this would be the center front or center back. And you always want to press your darts towards the center, be it the center back or the center front. And the reason for that is because when you're draping, you actually push all your excess towards the front or the back, respectively. So it ends up being just consistent with the draping process. So like I said, I did a couple of these, and you want to press from the wrong side first. So again, both of these darts are going to be going towards the center, and then you're going to press from this side as well. So that's what it looks like. There is, I believe there's a couple of objects over by the ironing boards called hams. They look like little hams, and those are for pressing out if you have a really curved dart, which sometimes on your front, your bust dart, you'll need to kind of do that. And I'll show you that at the end, but I want to show you all the sewing first. So that's the waist dart, very simple. Does anybody want to see the waist dart again? Yes, you want to see it again? Okay, I luckily have a second one right here. I mean, all the darts are kind of the same, but it doesn't matter. Repetition is good. And the more that you guys do these darts, the better you'll become. So again, you fold it in half like that. You'll see that your notches are going to match, and if they don't match, the lines aren't going to match. You're going to put a pin in towards the end. Make sure that pin goes through both lines. And I do, again, 2 to 3 pins. That's all we really need. And again, I'm going to start at the very tip. You always start at the tip of these darts, except for the fisheye dart. And it helps to walk your first stitch down so you know right where, you know, it's really, really at the very edge of that fabric. Don't back stitch, you're just gonna go straight. And then you're going to back stitch at the end of that, at the waist. Cut your threads, and then you're going to double knot it at the tip. So just a couple of basic terminology for darts. The dart tip is the pointy end of the dart, and you'll hear the legs of the dart referred to. That these are the legs, the different parts, different lines that come from the tip. Those are the legs of the dart. Okay, so that was the waist dart again. The next one that you can do is the bodice front. It doesn't matter which order you guys do these in, I don't care, but I'm gonna go in like easiest to hardest. Same thing, you're gonna just fold those darts in half so that the notches meet.
Which one is this again?
This is the front bodice. Yeah. Make sure those pins go through both legs, and you can pin more than the one dart at a time if you want. That's kind of a personal thing. This is the bodice, the front bodice dart, so it's a little hard to get in there and do this other one at the same time because it's a waist dart with a side seam dart, so it can be a little bit harder to do. But it's the same concept. So you pin it. You're going to go to the very tip here. Put your needle in by using your hand crank. And then just don't back stitch, just straight stitch all the way to the end. Double knot it. This is the front, yep. And then I'm gonna do the waist dart. So again, fold it, and I find it's nice, you know, you put it flat, pinch at the tip and pinch at the end, and then if you just kind of slide it so that those legs, those notches meet up and the legs are lined up, that's when you're gonna get the easiest time when you go to pin it. And it does, you know, I know it seems like very kind of detailed and particular, but you'll save yourself a lot of time and headache if you actually do try and make sure that these are specific to the lines that you're sewing on. And also, you know, this is why I said be careful when you're marking these, because you are actually using these as a guide to sew. So if you don't mark it correctly, you're not going to sew it correctly. And using a sharp pencil is also important, because if you use something that's thick, you're going to have a line that's not going to be as specific to that actual size. And you'd be surprised, I know I keep saying this, but you would be surprised how fast volume adds up and can add or subtract to your size. So when I go to press this, I would also do these two. When I go to press this, this would be pressed towards center front. Anything that is a horizontal dart gets pressed down. So this gets pressed down and this gets pressed towards center front. Does anybody want to see the other side of the front? Go back to it later maybe if anybody wants to see it again. The next one is the back. I've already done two of my back darts. Same thing. You pinch up, pinch at the tip, pinch at the legs. I know this is kind of repetitive, but I'm going to just keep going and do it anyway so you can see. Again, go through both legs. And like I said, sometimes you can pin. I find that you want to put the tip at your left hand, even if you are left-handed, because when you go to sew, when you pin this like this, your pins will then be on your right side, so you can pull them out. If you are left-handed, I suppose you could put them the other way, but the thing is, this way the excess material is going to always be on your left, which it should be, just because like with these tiny samples it doesn't make a big difference, but if you have a lot of bulk and it's over here, it's a little harder to manage. Again, put your needle in, no back stitching. These shoulder darts on the back piece, the back bodice, are they're pretty tiny, so make sure you pin those carefully. And since I already pinned this, I can now go ahead and just, again, put my needle in. Back stitch at the base of the dart. And again, this is, I will be checking when I grade you guys for your notebooks to make sure that you did actually tie off your darts. So again, I would then press this towards center back and this towards center back. Press it on this side, then flip it over. And when you press it, you want to flip it over because sometimes what can happen is these can get folded over a little bit more than the actual dart is. So you want to really make sure that when you press it, you don't want to yank it open too much, but you do want to make sure that that's nice and flat. Okay, the fisheye dart. This one is different than the regular darts because we don't want to go to the tip to the base. We're going to actually start at the base and we're going to do it like it's two different darts. So same thing though, you're going to fold it in half and make sure that these two center dots are exactly on the same point. Fold it in half and you're going to pin along the whole length of it, making sure those lines are meeting up through your pins. Darts are the one things that I do always pin. I know I'm always telling you guys how I don't pin very much, but darts are the one thing I do always pin. You're gonna start at the center of the dart for the fisheye dart. So you're gonna put your needle in, you're gonna do a small back stitch, just 2 or 3 little back stitches. Then you're gonna go to your tip, and that one you're gonna kind of leave. So try not to go, you're not gonna back stitch there. Try not to go too far. Leave yourself a little tail so that you can tie it off. Again, if you don't tie it off, they will open up, and we really don't want that to happen because then it defeats the purpose. So that's your first one. Then you're gonna flip it and go from that center again. Put that needle in, do a small back stitch. And then when you get to that tip, if you have to hand walk it, that's fine. And again, just leave yourself a nice little tail to do a double knot. And the last thing for this one, another thing that's sort of different, is that because this is, a fisheye dart would be something that would be used usually like on a waist area that would have to, you're asking the garment to sort of curve around an area that gets narrow and gets wide again, right? It's like an hourglass shape. But this can kind of pull in the center since the fabric is trying to open up. So you're just gonna do a small clip in the center of that fisheye dart so that this can then sort of lay a little bit more flat. And what you'll see is when you do press this, that actually does sort of open up a little bit more when it actually is pressed. And so if you didn't do that, it would be pulling a little bit and puckering a little bit. So you wanna just give that a nice little clip. Don't go too close, but if you don't, clip it enough, it's not really worth doing it. So this is the same thing. You're going to press this one way towards the center, which the straight one is the center, and basically you can see how that would then curve around a waist and get narrow in the center. Okay, and the last one is the French curve dart. Now this one is a little bit more complicated. There's an additional step, and that's going to be something a step that we're going to go over probably next week or the following week. We're going to do a technique called stay stitching. Stay stitching is used on curves and areas where you might be clipping into something and getting kind of close. When you do it on curves like the neck hole or the armhole or sometimes a waistline, the stay stitching makes it so that that curve doesn't stretch out as much. It's basically like a solidifying thing. So the stay stitch for this is we're just gonna kind of outline this, and I'm gonna do it right inside this line that I'm gonna end up sewing on. So I'm gonna do it in my seam allowance, but I wanna do it just sort of inside the seam allowance so I don't accidentally see it. And it's gonna be just a regular 2.5 length stitch. You don't have to back stitch when you stay stitch, but you want to make sure that you don't actually go onto the garment. Stay stitching should not really be seen. We're going to be doing other types of stay stitching when we get a little bit further into the year, but this is the first little taste of it. The other place that you'll see stay stitching, like I said, and if you guys finish early and you want to go ahead and add this because we'll be doing it next week, you can also stay stitch. Again, this is like a 1/2 inch seam allowance right here, so I'm going to stitch just inside of that. You don't want to go any shorter than 1/4 inch when you do your stay stitching. So basically what you're going to have to go back to do on all of these samples is that have neck and arm curves is do some stay stitching, and that's all you'll have to do. You don't have to do that for neck next week's notebook check, but it'll be for the following one. So if you want to get ahead, you can go ahead and do this when you do your samples. And again, just going to stay stitch inside that seam allowance line. I don't care if you don't stay perfectly even, as long as it's within the seam allowance and doesn't get too close to the edge. You know, the points, you know, will, if it's anywhere between like here and the seam, I'm fine with it, but try not to get, you know, I've had some samples go in, that's just, you're gonna end up having to take that out anyway. All right, so now that you have your stay stitching in here, you can clip into this to make it a little easier to move around, because you still want to line these lines up, and if you fold this in half, you're going to see that they sort of cross, and what you're going to need to do is make it so that those actually do line up. In order to do that, whenever you're sewing curves, and we're going to do a bunch more curves later on in the semester, you'll remember this, you want to clip on your curves. And so one of the reasons we actually stay stitch here is so that those clips don't actually turn into tears, right? So you can just do a few little clips. You don't have to go crazy, about 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch apart. And basically what that's going to do is going to make it so this can straighten up, and this can actually, it either is going to open up like this, or it's going to kind of fold over itself and make it easier for it to sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Move to be the same shape. That wasn't the term, but I can't remember what word I was looking for. So then again, same thing, I'm gonna go, this time I'm gonna move from the tip outwards because it's a little hard to start from out here, but you're basically gonna do the same thing. You're just gonna put your pin in so that it goes through both lines, making sure that your fold is at the tip there, and just go along this line and make sure that it meets up with the other line. And it really will, even though it seems like it might, you know, it doesn't seem like it would be able to do that, I promise it will, if you clip in. So for this sample, I'm going to be checking that you guys did your clips, did your stay stitching, and stayed on your lines. This is a little bit more of a complicated dart, but don't be discouraged or afraid of it, because it really isn't that bad. Something I like to tell my students is that, you know, you guys are in charge of the fabric. It's not going to dictate things. You can manipulate it into doing what you need it to do. So same thing here, I'm gonna start at my tip, put my needle in, and I'm just gonna follow my line. And my line is curved this time, so be careful. And try not to get any puckers. This has a tendency to pucker because it is a curve. So just go slow and backstitch at that end. Yeah. So the way to double check too that you've done a nice start is to just make sure, twist, you know, turn it over, and if you hit your line, then you've done a good job. You don't have to be too crazy about hitting that line. If it's off by a little bit, it's okay. Anything more than 1/8 of an inch needs to be redone. And the more specific and more, you know, sort of familiar you get with this process, you'll see that, you know, you get better at it and it gets easy. And this one you're actually going to press open, okay? So this is a little bit different, but that one would be pressed open so you can actually see all of that work that you've done. Same thing, press on this side, and then you're going to press on this side, and this is a good example of when you would probably use the ham, which I can demonstrate if you guys want, but basically it's just a rounded ironing board that you can then use to iron out this piece. Does anybody want to see anything again or need any clarification on that? Okay. Good, go ahead.